seems a place lost in time. Ethiopian villages, once robust with life, lay eerily deserted. These black African families were not refugees in flight to survive another season. They were returning to a home long dreamed of, but never seen. A remote people linked not to the next village, but to the distant land of Israel. They were Ethiopian, but they were also Jews. Abandoning the villages of their ancestors, Ethiopia's Jews chose to migrate from rural Ethiopia to modern Israel. They had escaped from famine and civil war and hopelessness. A journey from a medieval existence to the bustle of the late 20th century in a matter of hours. But in their rush to leave, few stopped to ask whether they could survive their own salvation. This is the village of Walaka, one day's walk from the headwaters of the Blue Nile. Walaka bears testimony to a life little changed since antiquity. Houses made of reeds and mud sheltered generations of Jewish farmers and herdsmen. Today, not one of them remains. Their homes abandoned, occupied by others.
As you see, Walaka is fantastically beautiful, but life is not easy here.
Workers like Rick Hodes, a physician for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, have spent years trying to search out and help the Jews in these remote highlands leave for a better life in Israel.
When I go into a village, the whole village lines up and gives me a list of their complaints. This one has a skin problem, this one has an eye problem, this one was bit by a snake and his finger is infected.
Today, Dr. Hode's job is almost complete. Almost all the Jews are gone. The Jews of Walaka lived like these non-Jewish villagers who moved into their abandoned homes. They eked out a meager existence without electricity or running water, making basic foods like injera, a spongy pancake-like bread, in a daily ritual unchanged in centuries. Yet theirs was a past veiled in mystery. When and how had they come to settle in the most remote region of Ethiopia? One legend claims they were descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Others claim they were members of the lost tribe of Dan, people who'd miraculously held on to their Judaism through 2,500 years of seclusion in Africa.
The first intensive contact that we have between Ethiopian Jews in the West takes place in the middle of the 19th century, when missionaries from something called the London Society for Promoting Christianity Amongst the Jews begin to arrive in Ethiopia in an attempt to convert the people there to Christianity, the Jews to Christianity. And world Jewry says, well, if these people are being converted to Christianity, they must really be Jews. So let's send someone there to investigate this.
The debate their discovery kindled went on for decades until the mid-1970s, when Ethiopia's Jews were officially recognized by the State of Israel. They were now significantly closer to fulfilling an ancient dream of going home to Jerusalem.
I remember when I was a kid that the elder people and the parents, especially in the evenings, that they have to gather us in a village, and they used to tell us about the history of the Jewish people and especially about Jerusalem.
When I was a boy, my grandfather has told me about Israel history. My ambition was to arrive to Israel and to be here in Jerusalem.
Under Israel's law of return, any Jew anywhere in the world can move to Israel and become a citizen. The Israeli government has long pledged to actively help Jews in danger reach Israel. In 1974, Ethiopia's Jews entered perhaps the most troubled period in their history. A revolution in Ethiopia brought a Marxist dictator to power, and soon the country was in disarray. Famine, strife, and widespread suffering sparked a bloody civil war. All the people in Ethiopia suffered. Thousands died. Entire villages were displaced in brutal efforts to centralize and control the people. In desperation, hundreds of thousands of Ethiopians fled. Whether alone or in small groups, they walked hundreds of miles under impossible conditions to reach the relative safety of neighboring Sudan. Amongst them were thousands of Jews.
It was not simple. It was very difficult. We didn't have enough water, enough food.
No one will show us the way. So we said at the night, we have to know how to walk according to the direction of the stars, the western stars.
So I had to walk over, I think, not less than 380 kilometers. It took me about 14 nights because I had to, during the day I did not walk. Because I had to avoid all the checkpoints all the way through.
The Jews who survived the hazards and obstacles of their escape arrived exhausted and hungry at Sudanese refugee camps. Their most cherished hope was that their journey would not end here. For many, it did not. In 1984, Israel fulfilled its long-held obligation under the law of return, organizing the rescue effort Operation Moses, a series of covert airlifts transporting almost 7,000 Ethiopian Jews to Israel. But tens of thousands of Jews remained in war-ravaged Ethiopia. Then, in 1989, Israel and Ethiopia established diplomatic relations. This news brought hope to many that at last they'd be allowed to leave for Israel. Jewish villages throughout the countryside began to empty as word of a possible exodus reached them. Thousands of people gathered expectantly around the Israeli embassy in Addis Ababa. But at the end of May 1991, the Marxist regime was collapsing and rebel forces were closing in on the besieged capital. More than 14,000 Jewish refugees were now trapped. Fearing a bloodbath, Israel struck a remarkable deal. $35 million was paid to the Ethiopian government. In return, all Ethiopian Jews would be evacuated immediately in an airlift codenamed Operation Solomon.
When we got word that Operation Solomon was about to take place, we were all very happy, but also very nervous, because we realized there was a great potential for failure. If a rocket landed in the wrong place, if something went wrong with an airplane, thousands of people could have been killed. By 10 or 11 in the morning, the road in front of the Israeli embassy was just flooded with people. There were thousands and thousands of people, both Ethiopian Jews and just local people wondering what was going on.
Embassy and Jewish agency officials determined who was eligible to go and who was not. Jewish families were given numbers to distinguish them from the thousands of Ethiopians who'd suddenly appeared, desperate to get out of the country. Wave upon wave of immigrants patiently followed instructions as they were transported to the airport. They were told to leave all their belongings behind. They were to arrive in Israel with just the clothes on their backs. During the next 36 hours, the world would witness one of the largest civilian airlifts in history. With rebel armies closing in on the city, many still feared a last-minute change of heart by the Ethiopian government, which would trap hundreds of Jews in Addis Ababa. Operation Solomon proceeded round the clock. As each plane took flight, another arrived, cramming more human cargo aboard than many thought possible. One plane carried over 1,000 new immigrants. They had waited all their lives for a chance to see Jerusalem, and finally, their day had come. With the success of this massive airlift of 14,000 Ethiopian Jews, almost every member of an ancient society had arrived in the modern age. It was an arrival fraught with conflicting emotions.
Frightened, confused, and it's just a very mixed feeling. Our Zionism was from our heart. That part made me very happy. Oh, my God, I made it. That's it. That's Jerusalem.
All through the weekend they arrived, taking their first tentative steps in the Promised Land. Next year in Jerusalem was no longer a prayer. In one 4-hour flight, they traveled across centuries. They were about to discover how their dreams would compare with the realities of modern Israel.
They have tremendous differences to cope with. I mean, they have new food, they have new